Hey everyone, I just wanted to do a little show and tell about one of my trucks that I posted a video pretty recently of driving around. And contrary to the spelling of it, this is Mammoth. If we pronounce it in Dutch, I guess it would be Mammoet. But it's based on the Tamiya Juggernaut 2 and TXT-1 platform. And I guess the first things I'll go over in no particular order is just the basic design and why I did things a certain way. And then I'll open it up and we can see the insides and the electronics. But so the first thing is that the tires are from the original Juggernaut 2. These are getting harder to find. And they look pretty new, but I actually do drive the truck using these tires. It's just that the amount of power it has is fairly low, so I baby it somewhat. And I've deliberately made this video right before I started cleaning it because there's some parts of the truck that are a little dirty and corrosion occurs or tarnishing happens, and they're all in the same usual places. Like right here, these are the original stacks that come with the Ford Aeromax. A lot of the other large Tamiya trucks share these kinds of parts, and yeah, they tarnish. A little bit of polish on them, or even just some oil, and a rub down on a cloth, and that'll address that. The truck, even though I keep it out, it does still attract dust, and also corrosion and tarnishing happens on these switches and other exposed metal parts. The aluminum that I use on the chassis, this is all 6061, and it's not anodized, so it's picked up a bit of a tarnish as well. These washers that I got were pretty cheap and nondescript, same thing. They've picked up a little bit of corrosion. These screws also, when I used these originally on the truck in 2004, they were zinc coat, probably not the right fit for something like this aluminum, and no doubt they have tarnished as well. But I've got the truck sitting on a really ridiculous, it's just a piece of scrap particle board I had on top of a Lazy Susan so I can point things out. But the highlights of it are really the suspension. And I'm going to try and get in a little close on this, but you can see that it's a dual facing elliptical leaf design, and it's inspired of all things by horse and buggy setups. And the lower spring has 3 sets of leaves, and the upper has five like individual leaves. And the reason for this imbalance is that if the leaves are squished together at high compression, then they won't kind of fold and give in. There's always going to be one side, which is the top, that'll set the direction and prevent the shackles from collapsing. This only ever happened when I was just testing it out, like playing around with it. And right after I started building the truck around 2004, I was playing with different options, and I saw the shackle collapse, and I'm like, what am I going to do to fix that? So I actually asked around, and it was, of all things, a horse and buggy broker, someone who sells these kind of like vintage supplies, that told me, yeah, you have to use uneven leaves on one of them, either the top or the bottom, and usually it's on top. To clarify, I don't think he ever built one of these. He just sold these sort of supplies and was very familiar with the underpinnings of them. He did tell me up front he's really not an expert on the hardware itself. He couldn't tell me what sort of leaves to use or what kind of loading on the springs, but you know, again, this was a very good hint, and that's what I ended up using. The actual leaves are then supported by oil dampers, and these come from the HPI Savage. There's no springs. It's just oil, and I use 50 weight. And it's funny, I couldn't tell you what unit I'm using because I just know it's associated 50 weight, so it's whatever they were using as their default unit, whether it's sent to Stokes or, yeah, I really don't know. The middle axle is set up to be a pass-through, and what happened here was that because of the design of the axle, it allows a shaft to just pass right over the top, and then there's a set of bevel gears which then converts the motion to go 90 degrees and then send everything to the diff. This allowed me to create six-wheel drive simply by extending the shaft. So I'll go into it probably in another video, but there's a longer shaft here, and that's the only thing special about this middle axle, where I had to drill a hole into the axle housing to make it pass through. There was already a ball bearing here. I used that and just guided my way out, and that's about it. Machining that shaft was a little tricky. I had to create splines. I matched the profile that was done with the original Tamiya parts. And back then I really wasn't comfortable using an indexer and a fourth axis on a rotary, on a vertical mill. But now it's something I guess I don't mind doing. It's just a matter of finding the time to do it. And I think I will make a new part with a better design, because the output over here is only 5mm and this side it's 6mm. If I make some adjustments, perhaps even boring out the gear so that I can fit 6mm shaft all the way through, then I don't need to use these sort of lower power drive shafts and then afford to send more power to the drivetrain. These are actually Traxxas Emax units, T-Max units, and as you can see, they're already candy caned a little bit, but these end up protecting the rest of the driveline simply because this truck is not meant to be a powerhouse. As you can see, there are 3 batteries, and the reason for that is that the middle battery is used, it's a smaller 2S LiPo. This is used for the radio and the servos, and the other 2 are used for the motors. The motor arrangement is pretty much similar to the stock, let's see if I can get in here, the stock Juggernaut and TXT transmission. I actually had a 3-speed in here at one point, but I was shredding drive shafts, and it really felt like the truck needed a clutch, and I wasn't prepared to make that kind of machining commitment, so I just went back to a single speed and it's fine. In spirit, this truck is really designed to be something like a Tamiya Bruiser, and you know, it's not meant to be high powered, it's meant to be fun and reliable. What's in here now is a pair of 19-turn censored brushless motors. And actually, a relic of the 3-speed is this plate. This is where the shift servo used to sit. And speaking of servos, I'm using AGF RC 24 kg/cm servos, 3 of them, 1 on each axle, to give me 6-wheel steer. The transfer case in the middle is basically the stock Juggernaut TXT-1 unit, and over here I have a bike speedometer. This was a unit that I sort of just grabbed randomly, and if you've never used one of these things, there's a magnetic reed switch you're supposed to install on the front wheel or rear wheel of your bike. And so I have a reed switch somewhere. I think yeah, here it is. The reed switch passes through to the front driver's side, and it mounts into the hub, and just this little cable goes all the way back to the bicycle speedometer. And you can program this thing. Most of them don't let you do it, but this particular one let me program to a really small wheel. So this is what I ended up using to just give me a general idea of how fast it is. And With the silver can motors that I used to have in here, it gave me 10 miles an hour, which is pretty much right on line with what a stock Juggernaut 2 is capable of, and seemed accurate enough. So the last thing I wanted to show was just the fact that I integrated this with the Tamiya Big Rig light and sound kit. So I'm going to go ahead and just turn on, not the radio, but the actual main power here. Did I plug it in? It would help if I plugged it in, but let me get the radio. I think, see, I haven't driven this truck in a long time. I've actually forgotten. And I'm using just a really basic Futaba twin stick. Oh yeah. That's the engine startup sound. I modified these lights to give me two LEDs. One is for the accessory light and one is for the brake light. So if I turn this off, I just realized I think I have my light set up incorrectly. This is supposed to light up, and not the brake. But as you can see, 6-wheel steer. And I use a claw style of 6-wheel steer, like all my other 6-wheelers. So my throttle's up here. Obviously there's no, the batteries and the motors are not hooked up. This is my steering. This is my turn signal, so you can see it. And I'm just using the old, the original Tamiya mechanical switch for that to control it. There's also a little volume knob. Gee, I don't even know if this works anymore. It does. Okay. This lets me turn the volume up and down of the sound kit. And my horn is over here. And that's about it in terms of the basic control and setup. All right, I'm going to open up the body and we can take a look at the electronics inside. All right, so opening up the body, there's a lot of stuff going on. I guess we'll look at the body individually first. So what I did was I mounted the Tamiya sound kit and light kit components wherever I could to try to get them out of the way. The light kit is in the sleeper cab all the way up top. You can see here that's a servo that controls the switch for the turn signals. And it's a bit of a wiring mess. There's just a lot of stuff going on here. I tried to clean up the layout of the cabling, but sort of did a so-so job on it. I've always wanted to experiment with like onboard computing or better sensors, and I just discovered, even though this is a pretty big truck, I mean, it is about 22 pounds, but there's just not enough space to do the things that I really want to do, even though this is a pretty big chassis. This is the speaker to the sound unit, and then you can see this jumble of wires, and these are for the motors and the sensor cables. I think I'm using, what kind of speed controls are these? Oh, these are Hobby Wing. They're the old ones. They're the Just Stock or Juice Stock. I don't really know how to pronounce it. I'm sorry. Basic censored speed controls. Again, I got these a couple years ago. This is the very basic mono TFHSS. It is spread spectrum. It is 2.4 gigahertz, but it's just a very, very basic receiver. I put the two receiver switches for the speed controls right here side by side. They're normally just on. I don't have to touch them. But interestingly enough, why is there a third speed control over here? You can kind of make it out. There's a Novak Super Rooster. And the purpose of it being here is because you have to have, for the backup lights and the backup beeper to work, a tap onto the output of the main motor. And because this is brushless, I can't tap onto the motors, since these are totally different signaling going out to the motor. So what I did was I simply slaved another brush speed control. I had one of these left lying around and decided I'll just plug this in so I can get my tap and make the backup lights and all those other things work. This is just a power bypass. This goes up to the light kit. This is just a switch that turns off the main power. And this is for the other signaling components like the lights. And then I have this for the servo that's for the turn signals. Really basic setup. I didn't go crazy with this truck. I never really intended it to be something like a really hardcore project. It was just, I wanted to have a six-wheeler that I could just drive around reliably, and it just worked. No surprises. And it has definitely fulfilled that role. It's been really reliable for me. I think of all the six-wheel drive trucks I have, it's the most reliable and has the most mileage on it. And a little funny anecdote that for my daughter, she grew up around these vehicles, and to her, monster trucks were always just sort of something that were in the basement, that were always here. And, you know, like when kids are really little, they're always scared there's monsters in the house. So she asked me, like, Daddy, are there monsters in the basement? And I said to her, I don't know, honey, there are no monsters. And she's like, how do you know? And she's like maybe just turning 4 years old at this point. So she can reason things. She kind of knows, you know, kids will know if you're lying to them, or if you just say something with such absolute conviction, they're kind of wondering what you know that they don't. And I said, you know, honey, do you know, like, we have monster trucks in the basement. And do you know why they're called monster trucks? And she's like, no. And I said, because they eat monsters. And it's like a little light bulb went off in her head. And then I asked her again, have you ever seen a monster in the house, in the basement? And she's like, no. So I said to her, yeah, well, that's why, because they eat all the monsters, and that's why the house has got no monsters. We don't have a monster problem. So one day, because I used to keep the trucks, at least one of them, always kind of on the floor of my workshop. One day, I had a wire shelf set up like this, and this is how I store my vehicles now. And she was just like, Daddy, you gotta get the trucks off the shelf. They can't go hunt monsters if you leave them up there. I thought it was the most awesome thing. But yeah, I don't really have much else to say. If there's any other questions, or there's anything you'd like to see, you know, please leave a note, and I will answer the best I can. And I guess if it's something that warrants me making another video about it, I'll go ahead and do it. But again, thanks for watching. I hope you found this enjoyable. Take care.